Carlos Mesquita is with us in studio. We're talking about the unhoused, the response of the city, the province, and national government, or actually sometimes the lack thereof.
As we got into Strandfontein, there was I think it's a ShopRite or Checkers on the right-hand side as the bus moved in. We saw all these people shouting, and they were shouting abuse at us, and we didn't know what was going on here. I later on got hold of a paper like a week later, and I realized that the residents of Strandfontein were not happy to have the unhoused there, and that there was going to be a court case, etc. But we didn't realize that on that Sunday that we were being moved in. And as we arrived and the bus parked, we realized, well, there's definitely something different here, because we're in the middle of nowhere, basically. That's what it looks like there. And the first thing that we picked up was immediately the amount of law enforcement officers present and security guards. And we had to line up. We were like cattle going to a slaughter. And
were these city or national? Or
no, this was law enforcement, local Cape Town law
Metro
enforcement.
Police?
Law enforcement, not the Metro, specifically the law enforcement officers, which we know from Cape Town. And then there was a security company that had obviously been appointed as well.
Which one?
I cannot remember, I must be honest with you.
Private security companies have been in the news lately.
Yeah, well, yeah, it wasn't PPA, that I can tell you because I know them well. And so do all the unhoused. Then we were again into little queues, and we were told to get rid of anything that that we were carrying with us, that we would be provided with everything we needed. So I basically walked in there with a pair of shorts and a T-shirt, which I walked out with again, despite all the donations that came in. And I was asking them, because it was going into winter, we never actually got whatever was promised on that day. We had to leave all our belongings outside the tent. And the very first question that we were asked as part of our screening was, have you ever been arrested? And by which police station? Not, have you got a cough? Have you got this?
No, not just the symptoms of...
And we were told this was a medical facility. It was going to be a medical facility so we could be safe during COVID. Yet the first question is, have you ever been arrested? Which police station? Whilst we're holding a number, because we were going to be known by numbers at Strandfontein. So it really felt to me as if I was in some movie, that I'm now some, as you see people being arrested and then holding their numbers, etc. That's how it felt.
How many buses were there?
It's difficult to say. When we arrived there, certain areas had already arrived, like Muizenberg had arrived, and we were confused. There were about 8 tents. Each of them, as you see on that, I don't know whether the public can see that, but the tents were basically marquee tents that you can, under normal circumstances, you'd have 500 people. That's before COVID, before the restrictions. Now, let me tell you, on the first night, tent number 2, where I slept, we were 608. I've got photos of where you can actually see we like sardines against each other. So there was no question that there was no... nobody can actually tell me and convince me that that was supposed to be for our benefit.
Right. Because no social distancing, that was what was happening at the time. Social distance, sanitize, wash your hands.
Yeah, and I mean, with all due respect, there were when you're talking about unhoused people, you have a lot of people with TB, you've got people with HIV, you've got, communicable diseases that we now are being exposed to, not only whatever COVID was, which we didn't even understand. So that was the first impression of it. And then to top it all, we had a death the first night. Somebody passed away on the first night, and which we became aware of like at 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, when the person's bowels had gone, etc. And, at the end of the day, we had that person lying in that heat. And, when you're in these tents, the heat becomes worse and the cold becomes even colder. So we had to go through 2 meals with that person lying in the tent. The person was collected eventually the next evening at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, which is against a lot of cultural, there were a lot of people upset by this. The other thing that was horrifying in the first night was that we were all together. So there wasn't a space for ladies that had been raped and that had got objections to lying next to males. I'll never forget the one lady, Pandiwe, that kept screaming that night. Because she just couldn't handle the fact that she was being laid next to a man when she had all these issues about being raped. It was horrible. I think the worst for me about the whole experience was the fact that they put people that were invalids, people that couldn't even help themselves to a toilet that was supposed to be on casseters. And we had to look after them. Ultimately, we had one gentleman, John Hafke, that today is a shadow of who he used to be. He used to wash these individuals, these 14 individuals, every single day. He used to wash their bedding, he used to wash their clothes. And so when he saw what happened to these individuals afterwards, when we were brought back to, sorry, I'm going to get emotional at points here, to Cape Town, he basically lost it. I mean, I saw him the other day and he's still lost. So there were a lot of things. I mean, I remember carrying a young lady, Nandipa. She couldn't have weighed more than 25 kilograms. She had TB and she had HIV. And I had to carry her to a loo to sit her down, to things like that. It was horrific. Then we talk about washing hands. There were 20 toilets with wash basins, of which only one worked on the first day. And out of it came this brown, stinky rioolwater, soos wat mense sal sê. I mean, it was disgusting. So we had one outside tap where everybody would do everything. The ladies would wash their panties, we would brush our teeth, we would wash our plates, all at that one tap. And so eventually, I approached the person that was running it on behalf of the City of Cape Town, and I said to the individual, we are not happy with these circumstances, and it's not about the city, this is about your service providers. And I was told that I would not tell them who their service providers would be. And that's basically when we started coming together, and we formed a committee, the Strandfontein Homeless Action Committee, to represent basically tent number 2. We had we'd gotten everybody in the tent together, and we said, we're not going to accept this, we're going to stand up to what's happening here. Because to us it was a question of, I was referred to it as if it was a photo taken at an instant, which was Strandfontein. And if you look at that picture, you see everything that is wrong and with how the City of Cape Town has treated unhoused people all along. So you saw the law enforcement aspect, you saw the not caring attitude of, putting people into big dormitories without even considering what they are doing to individuals that are being put into these situations. And so our whole fight at that point in time was to better the services that were being provided to us. And eventually, gradually, they did fix a lot of those issues, like with the water. It was on our last week that they eventually put ventilation into the...
How long did that take to fix the water?
I think that, initially what happened was that when the Human Rights Commission and people were still allowed into the camp, which would be in the first 2 weeks, because after they basically banned them, we got to speak to these individuals, and I had a small cell phone which I then utilized to send through things from Strandfontein, and that's why there was so much visuals and things happening at the camp. That we needed to get out to the press and to make them realize what was actually happening at that camp. And by the 4th week, the reports were already in by the Human Rights Commission, the head of the South African police that had been there, and everybody was criticizing the Doctors Without Borders. Everybody was criticizing the camp.
Yes, so so you are among one of the people who got this information out.
Correct.
And then on that, the Human Rights Commission investigated this.
We actually met, there were human rights monitors at the camp that we saw on a daily basis.
So the first 2 weeks they were there, and then the City of Cape Town no longer gave the investigators access to the site.
Yeah, the first to be stopped were the journalists, etc. And then there was an incident at the camp where we had requested to meet with the city. They had refused to meet with us, and we then asked to meet with the monitors. The monitors arrived, but they weren't allowed in. And we were speaking to them at the gate when a whole ruckus, happened. We wanted the monitors to come in so that we could advise them as to what we needed done, etc. We wanted to see lawyers, and they were preventing the Human Rights Commission to come in. And what happened was, at one stage they had to open the gate to let some of the service providers out that had brought food in, and we basically formed a U or a horseshoe shape around the monitors and brought them into the encampment. And the minute we had that, I mean, we had rubber bullets being shot at us, and eventually we asked for the South African police to come through because we were not allowed, we were not prepared to let the Human Rights Commission monitors out and not be sure of our safety or theirs. And so we waited until the SAPS arrived before the monitors left. The day after that, all hell had broken loose, and so the press was being told that the human rights monitors were causing trouble at Strandfontein, and they were things that really didn't happen. I mean, it was a very peaceful thing. We wanted to just bring them in so that we could talk and so that we could ask them to speak to our lawyers. We weren't even allowed to speak to the lawyers. And, when people said, it's like being in prison, then I said, it's worse than being in prison. In prison, you're allowed to speak to a lawyer.